Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming along. See if I can get the system working. There we are, that's what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm just going to outline roughly what I hope to speak about today. Briefly what the National Bee Improvement Programme is, why it's needed really, current conventional methods of achieving better bees, which I think are a bit lacking in some respects. I'm just going to look at the diversity of opinion in beekeeping. There's so much, we've all got so many different opinions, and that's why it's so hard to reach any unity or come together and do something worthwhile for beekeeping. I'm going to talk about how every beekeeper can participate in the National Bee Improvement Programme, the mechanics of the system, and how we can achieve sustainable results. And then I'm going to just briefly discuss whether it's a system that works. Obviously, I believe it is, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So, a couple of points before we get onto it. Someone said to me the other day that they thought they didn't agree with bee improvement because it's unnatural. And I was a bit taken aback because maybe it is a bit unnatural, but we're not living in a totally natural world. We're not living in a hunter-gatherer society anymore. We do rely on agriculture for our food production. We've been modifying and improving food production ever since agriculture started, and hence we're able to feed 7+ billion people. So we have to remember we're not totally living in a natural world. If we were, it'd be a totally different kettle of fish. Food production relies on a healthy and sustainable honeybee population, and that it's a system that should be good for the beekeeper and good for the bees, because that's the heart of the matter. Beekeeping is a partnership between beekeepers and bees, and I don't think we should forget that really. Sustainable's it's a really good word, but it's a very overused word, unfortunately. So I'm just going to outline what we mean by sustainable bee improvement, and it's just a system that can maintain or improve quality indefinitely. And that's the key to it really. We want a system where our bees we can keep good bees and keep them good, and where they're lacking we can improve them and so on. And it's a system that can go on and on. It's not a system where we have to repeatedly bring in new and better stock to address deteriorating quality, which is kind of the position a lot of us find us in at the moment. So bee improvement is about achieving the qualities that we want to see in our bees. And that's all it is really. Because we as half of the equation, the bees are the other half, we've got to find things that suit us as well as the bees. So briefly, what is the National Bee Improvement Programme? Well, as Selwyn said, it's been launched by BIBBA to maintain or improve the quality of our bees in a sustainable way. And the aim is to get the support of as many beekeepers and beekeeping organisations as possible. We think it's important for the future of beekeeping, for the future of, it's a bit strong to say the human race, but food production and so on, and biodiversity in nature. It's all linked in. And this is a sort of topical headline we're seeing at the moment to do with agriculture. Government unveils path to sustainability. The introduction of a new system that is centred on support for sustainable farming practices. The changes are an attempt to ensure farmers in England can sustainably produce healthy food profitably. And that's the sort of discussion that's underway in agriculture. I think, where does beekeeping fit into that? And we need to be having a similar conversation in beekeeping, really. We can't just take a short-term view of things. We need to look for the longer term. And we know things are quite critical environmentally at the moment, and beekeepers are very much aware of the environment, and we are part of it. It's that we can do something to help. Just to recap, I mean, I'm sure you all know these things. Beekeeping is important for maintaining biodiversity in the environment, and it's important for agriculture and food production. I mean, those two reasons are why many people come into beekeeping. They feel they want to do something to help the situation. And the current situation is we've been importing bees for over 150 years. By importing, I mean bringing in bees of different subspecies. And it's resulted in a background population that's a random mixture of different subspecies and a variable and often poor quality. That's what we're faced with. This is why we're always looking around for better bees. Where can we get better bees from? Some of us are happy to try and improve what we've got, and some think, well, I'll try this and I'll try that. And certainly when I came into beekeeping, I was looking around for what I could find that was better than what I'd got. And that's a natural position to be in, I think, with the state we're in. But imports can also be associated with biosecurity risks. There's always a danger we're going to bring in some nasty pest or disease. We've done it before, and we'll probably do it again because we're not too clever at addressing the problem. Many see buying in stock from bee breeders as the only way to progress and achieve quality, and that's the current situation. And as Brother Adam he was a real advocate of buying in bees, and he liked to sell his bees. And if you asked him about how to get good bees, which I did on that occasion, because that's me in the background, the answer was to buy in a queen from him, or a buckfast queen, and you can rear queens from it and so on, and you'll bring the quality of your bees right up. And then the quality will start deteriorating, and that's when you buy in another queen from, and you keep repeating the cycle. And I wasn't very happy with that answer, really. It didn't seem the right way to go. And just to remind people, in case you're quite new to beekeeping, this just shows the different subspecies in Europe, probably before we started messing around, moving them all over the place, in, say, the 1850s. So there's numerous, and they've all developed in geographical isolation, and to best suit their environment. And we know there's all different environments throughout Europe, and that's how these have, because they're geographically isolated, they've evolved to fill those gaps, to suit those areas. And we've been bringing in bees since the 1850s, particularly in the 20th century, and it's continuing in the 21st century. Hence our background bee population is very mixed, and this is what a couple of scientists came up with by doing some DNA analysis of samples of bees from throughout Britain, I think, and they worked out there's all these different subspecies in them. I mean, some of them are the same. I think that's Hawaiian carniolan or carnicas, SI, I don't know what that stands for, and German carniolans and so on. And that's what they could see in the bees looking at the genes. So what is the problem with bees? Why do I not think that's a great idea to keep bringing in different subspecies? Well, some people really think it's quite a clever idea because, I mean, livestock farmers have been doing this for years. They've selected and improved their stock. They've been doing that since Neolithic times, and it's quite a common technique is to cross one breed with another to get hybrid vigour. You see it in sheep breeders. The sheep farmers cross something with something else. The cattle breeders do it as well, and they get away with it, and they produce good stock because it's got that extra vigour, that hybrid vigour, and it's a technique that works well for them, otherwise they wouldn't do it. They're able to keep the pure breeds going to allow them to do that. But when we try and do that with a honeybee, and Brother Adam was quite keen on this, he liked to cross the Italian with the Carnica and so on, and he found they went together quite well. They didn't produce aggressive bees. They did get the benefit of hybrid vigour, which everybody liked, and we still like to this day, many beekeepers. So what's the problem with it? Well, the problem with bees in particular, I think, is to do with their mating system. We know the queen mates with multiple drones from the area, and unless we have alternative techniques in place, like instrumental insemination or isolated mating areas, the bees we've got are just going to mate with everything in the area. And so if we've started with a nice hybrid bee, and we're very pleased with the results, what's going to happen 2 or 3 generations down the line? They're going to get more and more mixed up. And it's not as if we're just restricting it to 1 or 2 breeds. We're mixing loads of different things in. And we're not getting a very satisfactory situation. So hybrid vigour in bees may give good results, but the end result after a few generations is a hybridised or mongrelized, that's randomly mixed, local bee population. And this is the position we're in. And it's not an easy position to deal with. How are we going to get out of it so we can actually sustainably improve our bees? So many beekeepers faced with that, they think, oh, well, the only way to deal with it is to buy in some more bees, buy in some more queens, another queen, to get the quality up. And it's a system that beekeepers have been wedded to for quite a long time. Not everybody. Some people are happy to try and do what they can with with the bees in their area. But I think roughly in the bee farmers, it's thought that probably 2/3 of bee farmers like buying in bees, and 1/3 are happy to work with what they've got. So that's quite a big influence on what's happening in this country. So we need to think again about how we can improve our bees, because that is to me, that's a vicious circle. Declining quality, right, bring in some more bees, followed by declining quality. You know, it gets the quality up for a bit and then down it goes. And that is not a happy situation. So we also need to think about where we'd like to be in, say, 10 years or 20 years, or even 150 years. I know we won't be here, but we've been importing bees for more than 150 years. So are we going to just carry on like that for another 150 years? Or is there a better way of doing it? I mean, if we carry on the same, obviously we're not going to get out of the position we're in now. So can we develop a more sustainable system that gives us a hardy bee in tune with its environment, and one that can keep evolving to cope with changing conditions? And conditions always do change. Conditions out there now are not the same as they were in 1850. Agriculture has changed a lot, the population has grown tremendously, and so on. Can we find a way forward that suits most beekeepers and that can maintain or improve the quality of our bees in a sustainable way? And that's the question we should be asking. Beekeepers should be asking. Beekeeping organisations should be trying to address that question, I think. The one problem, as I alluded to at the beginning, was we've all got so many different opinions, a very wide spectrum, and this isn't a very good diagram perhaps, but if we start on the left, if you imagine, we've probably all got a bit of all those groups in us, but if you think of a commercial beekeeper, perhaps he's obviously a commercial beekeeper, he's got to make a living, he's got to make a profit out of his business, he's seeking to maximise honey production and profitability. He needs reliable results now, not in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, to stay in business. The trouble is, that's why quite a lot of them are happy to import, because they know they can get instant results, quality up, and they don't think about what that effect that's having on the rest of the bee population. Perhaps on the other extreme, on the right, is what we call the natural beekeepers these days, people who are not bothered about any return from their bees particularly, but they feel they're contributing to the environment by just keeping bees. They're not concerned with productivity, happy to contribute to the environment. They want to provide natural conditions for the bee, believing that it will allow the bees to thrive. Perhaps they don't believe in any bee improvement because it's not natural. And then there's people stuck in between, which I'm calling average beekeepers, and they might understand that beekeeping is a partnership between the bees and the beekeeper. They both need to get some benefit for the partnership to work. It's no good if it doesn't suit the bee, and it's no good if it doesn't suit the beekeeper. They've got some sympathy for the commercial beekeepers, some for the natural beekeepers, but we're stuck in the middle, and we like that group. We're looking for people that can agree on a way forward, really. And is it going to be possible with all those different opinions? Can we reach a consensus and satisfy the spectrum of opinions in beekeeping? That's a difficult question. This is our current system, really. I've told this pointer isn't much use for people who aren't in the room, but it's not much use for people who are in the room, as it is. It's a little bit. This is where we are. This is our beekeeping our bee population that we're working with. We've all got our local populations, and some of us are happy with it, and some of us aren't for various reasons. They may be aggressive, they may not be productive, or whatever. Maybe reasons we don't like it, and if we don't like it, we're going to look elsewhere for bees, and we're going to look to the bee breeders, and then we're going to, if you only got to go on the forums and you see people recommending this type of bee, that type of bee, and brilliant to bring this in and bring that in. And so they go to the bee breeders, somebody might go for that one and bring that in, someone else might think these are better. And this is the system we're in at the moment, where we're just bringing in this, that and the other in a desperate attempt to improve our bees. And it obviously gives results, because people wouldn't keep doing it if it didn't. But as I say, they're short-term results, and they leave a bit of a mess in their wake. In other words, a very mixed population that's very difficult to do anything with. So it leaves us with the current choice. Do we do the best we can with the local bees, which is one option, or do we buy in and get a better quality bee, but only temporarily, no long-term improvement in our local populations? And we also have the added biosecurity risks that, could really scupper beekeeping in the future. And we're still reeling from Varroa, really, which was 30 years ago. There is another alternative, and that's to change the whole thing to a more sustainable system that improves our local population. And I think this is where we should be focusing. We should be focusing on improving our local populations of bees. And we've always thought, that's too difficult. How can you do that? Because we haven't got enough influence. But I'll try and illustrate how we can do it. So we want a sustainable system that allows us to select the best bees for the area, encourages bees with local adaptation. They're totally tuned into their local environment. There's no deterioration in quality over time. We don't need to keep bringing in replacements because our bees are not, the quality is improving. And the Collis report a few years ago said locally adapted bees, they did an experiment, locally adapted bees fare better than imported ones, because if you bring imported ones in, they're genetically evolved to a totally different climate, and they've got to get used to our climate or conditions. This is what Collis said: the spread of imported genes into the local population may increase genetic diversity, but it's not necessarily beneficial, as maladapted genes may contribute to colony losses. So if we're bringing unsuitable genes in, we're likely to get heavier losses. Is there a better way of doing things? So we want to centre things around our local bee population. How are we going to get the standards up? Bee breeders will still have a role, but instead of them being the be-all and end-all, them being at the centre of the whole system, the beekeepers are going to be at the centre of the system with their local bees, and the bee breeders can maybe contribute, and I'll show you how later. The role of a bee breeder is to make queens and nukes available that are compatible with our local bees. So we're not going to be bringing all sorts of bees into the system. So how are we going to refine our local population? We're back to that background population of bees, which is the brownie one. On the whole, they're a bit hit and miss. They're a bit not that great, not that productive, or whatever, and they might be aggressive and so on. Various reasons why we might not be happy with them. If we stop bringing in stop addition of exotic imports, that's the first step really. Don't keep bringing bees in, because all you're doing is adding to the problem ultimately. Yes, you might get short-term relief, but that's all. And if we just started with that background population and let nature take its course, the population would evolve towards that bottom green box. That's just the effect of natural selection. So that's a good thing to work with, because the best bees or the best survivors are continuing in the local environment. But obviously, as beekeepers, that isn't going to be good enough, because nature isn't going to choose the same as we choose. Yes, we want them to survive. That's a very basic thing, so that's why it's nice to work with natural selection. But we also want other qualities. I would suggest, and we'll all probably want something slightly different. A lot of us want productivity. Probably top of the list for most people is the docility of the bee. Are they nice to handle? And there's various other things. It might be varroa tolerance could be an important one. It is an important one, because how are they going to survive? And up to the beekeepers to choose the qualities they want. So we're going to evolve that system through natural and artificial selection. Artificial selection refers to selection by the beekeeper. So we start by refraining from exotic imports. Accept natural selection as a good starting point. It's helping to evolve the bees. We're applying artificial selection for the qualities we want. We can use bee breeders who've got a place in the system. They can work with these bees, try and enhance the qualities, and then we can feed them back in. The aim is to maintain a genetically diverse population, but one which breeds true. That's the big problem with our background population at the moment. You find a nice bee and you try and rear from that, because it's genetically very mixed. The offspring are a bit all over the place. The offspring will be genetically mixed, so they'll all be quite different characteristics probably. So when we can get slightly more homogeneous population, we can have ones that breed true. And I'm not saying we should do away with genetic diversity. We need that, but within a framework. Development of a local strain should be guided by what's the easiest to achieve. So what's a breeding strain? Well, it's a group of colonies which show uniform or fairly uniform characters and breed true to type. And this is what we're aiming for, bees that breed true. And we're never going to get that while we keep introducing new types of bee. For a start, they've got to adapt to the local environment through natural selection and so on. Okay. So this is where we start really. We start with our own bees and we monitor them and we see which are the good ones, which are the bad ones. And it might, I know you're not going to be able to see the form in detail, but it's a quick way of finding out which bees are worth breeding from and which bees aren't. And you can put on this form which characteristics you're interested in. And these are the ones that I use. I can't hardly see it either, I'm afraid. So, but basically, you'd have things like you'd measure how nice they are to work with. And I score them all out of 5, between 1 and 5. So if they're really delightful to work with, no aggression whatsoever, they get a 5. And if they're horrendous, they get a 1. And you very quickly can sort your bees out. You can put the characteristics in you want. I measure how much, whether they swarm or not, and so on, whether low swarming, and we won't go into the detail of that now. Just to say, you can download that form from the BIBBA website, and you can modify it to suit your own needs. So if you decide you want to select for a certain characteristic, you can put that on there and monitor your bees for that. I have put this in here. These are what I do. I'm going to say what I do now, because it just gives you an idea how it can be put into practice. Not because you've all got to do the same as me. You design it how you want. Because I always use the bees that survive. I don't keep bringing new bees into my area. I'm just relying on the hardiness that's evolving through natural selection, because every winter some will die out, and I'll be left with what nature has chosen, really. And from those ones that nature has chosen, I'm choosing the ones that are very docile. They're lovely to handle. I'm personally choosing ones that are our original native strain. They're like our native subspecies, Apis mellifera mellifera. And I started with a complete mixture of bees, and this is what I've been doing for a few years now. And there's 3 ways you can work that out through what the bees look like. You can do morphometry, and you can do DNA analysis. And probably DNA analysis is the most accurate, but not that readily available. I just use appearance. Health. I'm very interested in the health of the bee. Is the brood pattern looking good? Have I got chalk brood there? Is it all really healthy? And also under that category, I want to see how they come in the spring. I see how they come through the winter nice and strong, so they're ready to really take off and expand in the spring. I keep a track of which bees swarm and which don't, and if they go through the first full season without swarming and produce a nice crop of honey, I think that's a really good attribute, and I select for that, and I measure how much honey they produce, and because that really, we don't know the factors that go into that, but to me it's a measure of how good the bee is, really. And it's not, oh, this bee produced £100, what these bees did, these produced £10. It's how much a colony produced compared to the average for the apiary, because we've all got different areas. Some areas are much better than others, much more productive, so it's comparing it with the apiary average to find the above average ones. Okay, and from those record cards, the point of keeping records of their performance, not just your management records, but records of their performance, you can then select your breeder queens. And that this is crucial. Don't be alarmed by the term breeder queen. It's not something for just those with hundreds of colonies. It's for ordinary beekeepers. You might have 2 colonies. You can select your breeder queen. It might be one that is better than the other. So we want offspring from that good one rather than from that bad one. It's just the ones we want to get offspring from. The key to the system are the daughters of the breeder queens. Now, everyone says the key to the system are the drones. And how can you get good queens? How can you get them mated satisfactorily? And it's difficult, but I'll show you how it can be done. So the daughters of the breeder queens, so I've chosen these breeder queens, I really like them, and I'm going to rear queens from all of them, because I've got quite a lot of bees, so I can do it. If you haven't got many bees, there's a way around it. You work in groups, work with other like-minded beekeepers and do the same thing. But I can produce these queens, and then no matter what those queens mate with, and they'll mate with whatever drones are in the area, at least the drones they produce will be related to those breeder queens I selected, because they're unfertilised eggs from unfertilised eggs, and the drones should be good because I chose that breeder queen, and now their daughters are producing really good drones, and those really good drones are going to mate with your next generation of daughter queens, which are hopefully, people worry about inbreeding. Well, you don't. You keep chopping and changing your breeder queens. You have numerous queens. You use unrelated ones and so on. Anyway, off we go. Now, another issue, very common issue. I've got a bee farmer on my doorstep. He's got hundreds of colonies of this type of bee, and it's not my local bee. He keeps bringing in stock and so on. How am I going to get decent mating? Not an easy answer, but basically, if you're a small-scale beekeeper, you've got to work with other beekeepers, and you've got to identify an area that you can flood with your type of bee. So you find an area away from your. You might be lucky. You might have a bee farmer who's sympathetic to what your views and what you're trying to do, and you can all work together, which is the best solution. And there are certainly plenty of bee farmers in that category. But if they're not, you've got to find another area where you can actually dominate. So it's all about dominating an area with your good drones. It might be. It's not so easy in sort of south of England and the Midlands because it's more flat. But some areas can use hills and mountains, and some areas can use areas of water and so on. Or low population where there's not many beekeepers. But you've got to find an area that you can dominate, and it's not as bad as it seems. I don't think. Because if you read the books, it'll tell you you've got to not have any. You've got to have a 6-mile radius completely dominated by your bees. Well, I work with a lot less, and it seems to work, and I'll show you in a minute. There also, because I use the native bee, or near native bee. There may be other mechanisms that favour that, and I believe there are, and I'm not speaking from a science, proven by science now, but just from what appears to happen. Native drones and queens may mate in cooler conditions. Lots of people say that, and it stands to reason, because how have they survived in our climate if they don't? Because some summers are terrible, you don't get very warm temperatures, and they'll get out and mate. They also may mate closer to the hive. They may not be so reliant on drone congregation areas forming in lovely weather. I don't know. But I think somehow I seem to get quite good matings with my bees. And this is where I live. Just as an illustration, I am a bit lucky because I've got some sea around me. And this is southeast Cornwall, the Rain Peninsula, opposite Plymouth. Some drones, we think, come over from Plymouth. Some, but not very many. I'm going to use my pointer. Oh, I can't hardly see, but this northern area, I haven't got all the bees there. There's some bees in that area which are not my bees and which I don't think are the same type of bee. There's even one down right at the southernmost point. He likes to use buckfast bees, because there's always a danger that his drones might mate with mine. We rear lots of queens, and we have 2 or 3 mating areas in in the middle of that area, that Rain Peninsula. So we're subject to other people's bees. There's quite a few small-scale beekeepers as well, but nearly all of them are trying to use the same type of bee as us. So that's great. It makes it quite good. On the whole, we get good matings. And it's got better over the years, and that's the point you've got to work on. You've just got to keep working on repeating this system each year until you get better. This is the sort of thing I've got. They're not 30 yards apart, unfortunately, like is recommended by some people, but I have apiaries. There's 10 there, but usually 12 in an apiary, and I've got several of those apiaries on that Rain Peninsula. And in the spring, I look at those bees. I'm going to have to hurry up because I want to give you time for questions and answers. But I go through each colony in the spring, and some won't have survived, so that's fine. And the ones that have, I want to make sure they're lovely temper, they look native, and they've come through strong, good brood pattern. So I'm making sure in each apiary in that breeding area, I've got good bees. So then I'm assuming from that I'm going to get good drones. I don't actually do anything to promote the drones. I let them rear what they want. But I do know the parent colonies are good. Anything I don't like, say I find one that tempers a bit off, I'll take that out of the area, out of the breeding area, and probably eventually requeen it or something like that. So that's the spring assessment and selection, and you can just all get this system going and do the same thing in your breeding area. And I'll just show a few photos now. I mean, I've been working trying to get the native bee, or near-native is probably more accurate, because if it's DNA tested, they'd find something else in it, no doubt. Dark abdomens, gingery hairs around the thorax, like that. The light stripes are thin, the Tementa are thin. If they're broad, it's usually a sign of Carnica. People who bring in buckfast bees, after a generation or two, they start producing some bees that look more like Carnica, some that look more like the Italian ones, and so you start seeing ones with the broad bands. I use these things to make my queens in. They're 6-frame nuke boxes. I prefer them to the little apideas. A lot of people love the apideas, the small mini nukes, but we get on better with these. They're a bit bigger, and I can overwinter bees in them quite happily. So then I come to the spring, and I've got them ready to go again. So when I start rearing queens, I can take the queen out and put the new one in to wait, and then give her a couple of weeks for her to mate. And then you get something like that, if you're lucky. And there they are. And if you look at the bees, this is how I assess them for nativeness. So I look at them all, and they all look the same. They're not some yellow ones and some black ones and so on. And it won't be like that when you start, because our bees were all different sorts when we started. So the ones that were most like that I used to breed from, and then gradually you can refine it. And that's what bee improvement's all about, refining the bee population till it's producing what you want, the qualities that you want to see in your bees. And you just got to keep going, and there'll be setbacks and difficult times and so on, but you just keep repeating and doing it, hopefully getting others to join you and so on, and you gradually make progress. Does it work? Well, we're looking for temper. I can say we've pretty much achieved that. Most of them are really nice to work with. There's always the odd one that isn't, or the odd time of year when they can be a bit stroppy, and that's natural for bees. When they're swarming and so on, they can get a bit iffy and so on. But on the whole, they're great to work with. You can do it without gloves, without any trouble. Brood pattern, we're always looking for that good brood pattern and that health. Sometimes you see a lot of short brood, so you don't breed from those. You're always aware of the health situation, and you're always looking for the ones that produce honey and don't swarm. Productivity, I think they're as good as anything else in my area. It's not. I don't think it's a fantastic area for honey production. It's the soils are poor. They dry out in a matter of days. Otherwise, it's raining all the time. But some of them are very productive, and I think we're making progress on those lines. Purity of strain, I generally do it by their appearance, which some people don't like. They think it's a bit rough and ready. They think you should be much more scientific about. Occasionally I get the chance to have some tested, DNA tested. I don't have to pay, luckily. So I have got some DNA results. This was about 3 years ago. I've sent samples off since, but I don't think I've had any results. Anyway, this is the sort of thing you get back. This was, all our breeder queens are named. We don't name, they only get named if they're worth breeding from. And that is just so we can distinguish them. We know that one's bluebell or whatever, and we know it isn't R6572, because that's too difficult to remember. So they all get named, and bluebell is the top one, and that was 90 to 100%, which is counted as a pure breed. Kim 2, that was a daughter of one I got off a lady who I'd sold some bees to earlier, and that one was brilliant as well. And the next one was a Blackberry 2. If a daughter of Blackberry 2 is good enough to be a breeder, that will be Blackberry 3. And that's how the system works. We're on Blackberry 6 now because they're a really good line, and they've done very well for us. They tend to be good honey producers, lovely temper and so on. You can't really fault them. And we sent 7 samples off on that batch. 5 of them came out as what they call pure breeds, and 2 of them were a bit lower. So summary, I better shut up in a minute. What does NatBIP offer? The system is based on the bees that we already have in our area, so anybody can join in, and that's the beauty of it. You haven't got to search around for some decent bees. You use the best of what you've got, and that's where I started, and I liked starting there. It's a bit of a challenge because you know your bees are a bit rubbish. Well, I'm not saying your bees are rubbish. My bees were rubbish. There was all sorts of problems with them, a lot of bad temper and so on. But gradually they've got a lot better. And that to me proves the system works. And that's the important thing about it. I'd just like to see it adopted by the majority of beekeepers, because then we could really change things for the better in this country. It's no good just 1 or 2 people doing it. You want all beekeepers to do it as a matter of course. The beekeeping organisation should be promoting this because it's in all of our interests. Bringing in incompatible genes adds nothing to the system. It merely sets the clocks back. You've got to start selecting again because you've got new genes in the area. Are they any good? So every time new bees come into the area, you're kind of starting again. Progress based on selecting the bees that do well in your area or our conditions. Natural selection gets rid of unsuitable genes. Artificial selection produces the qualities that we want. So, I'm going to skip through this, I think. But what you can do is find out all about it on, I've more or less told you what to do, but you can find out all about it on the BIBBA website, and there's a section called NatBIP. You can click on that. You can download record cards. You can modify the record cards to suit what you think is important. You can work together as a group and discuss it and see which qualities the group wants to choose. And off you go. You monitor your colonies and you find this is a nice one to breed from. Why don't we do that? And you can work together and make so it isn't too difficult. The more queens we rear from selected breeder queens, the more good drones we have in the area. And I've got to skip a little bit, but I think I've already covered these points really. Everybody can take part. And commercial beekeepers worry about, is their honey production going to drop? That's the main thing for them. If it is, they don't want to know, basically. I think the answer to that is it might drop to start with because you're trying to bring up the quality of the bees. But the answer is, right, why don't you devote a quarter of your enterprise to this system, this sustainable system, and get quarter of your bees going in that direction in one particular area, and then you're already taking strides down that road. When you start getting the quality up, you can gradually perhaps switch the whole system over to them. And there are opportunities for bee farmers and so on, commercial beekeepers, because there's always people wanting to buy what we call local stock, or good bees, and they can be producing these local stock that's already up to a certain standard and selling queens and nukes. So there's certainly opportunities as well as worrying about their honey yield. This is BIBBA. The objectives of the association are the conservation, restoration, study, selection and improvement of native and near-native honeybees. And that's the book that describes how I went about trying to improve my bees, really. So just go to the BIBBA website and you can look up all about it.
How long in terms of years, how many seasons and cycles before you would see improvement if you were starting off with a local mongrel stock?
I've been doing it for a long time, but actually you can see improvement in 2 or 3 seasons. I mean, I started with focusing on the temper of my bees because that was the first thing that I thought I'd better get right, because there's some pretty nasty bees. So I started cutting them out straight away, and even the second season there's an improvement there. By the third season you're finding they're all manageable and all okay, and I mean I think we're still improving on the temper really. The improvement doesn't really stop, but as far as getting a native strain goes, I started with a whole mixture of bees, and that takes a bit longer, I would say. And it's difficult for small scale ones, but you've got to work with others. And I was able to dominate that Rain Peninsula because I have the most bees in that area. So if you're not in such a strong position like that, it will be more difficult, but don't give up and show you can make progress and get more and more people involved. But I'd say you'll be making progress from straight away, to be honest, because you can cut out those bad-tempered ones. When I was bee inspecting, I went round to see people's bees, and it's remarkable what bad-tempered people would put up with, and they wouldn't know how to start or how to do anything about it, and they just say they're bad-tempered, and you're thinking, why don't you do something about it, And that's the place to start, really, because that you can progress on that in a matter of a season or two. And progress should just continue every year, so you should be encouraged by your results. But I would say it doesn't stop, and we've still got lots to do with our bees to make them better. It's not as if we've got the perfect bee by any means, but I've certainly got bees that are a lot better than when I started.
Our problem doesn't seem to be how we manage the bees, but how to manage the people around to get a cooperative system. So I think there's it's a lot to sort of, what you're talking about is a new way of developing beekeeping as an activity. And I think it seems to me that working on the humans is equally important as working on the bees.
You're absolutely right, of course, and I totally agree, and I have to sympathise with people who've, surrounded by other bees that perhaps they don't want. But, I mean, when I started, I didn't try and form a group with the whole of our local association, but there were a few people who came and said they were very interested, and gradually you get a group of people who are keen to work with you, and that's where you start. But it's always going to be difficult until this becomes the norm, if you like, and that's where we'd like to see it become. If it's the norm, then most people will be doing it, and you'll never get everybody doing it, but the more people that do it, the easier it's going to get. It's difficult because it's like we're only at the start of it in a way, and it's like getting a great big wheel turning and getting some momentum, and it's so difficult. But we're hopeful that it will get there, and that's all you can hope. You just got to keep trying. It's going to be difficult, but if more and more people come to it, we'll get there.
I think that's an important point. BIBBA's moving towards what we're calling the 4 sustainabilities, which is a sustainable environment, sustainable bees, sustainable beekeeping, and sustainable honey markets. And so if we're going to have sustainable bees, we clearly need sustainable beekeeping. So the point you're making is absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the numbers, really, that kind of obviously you have a certain number of hives and you select a certain proportion of queens. Kind of what proportion of queens, how many queens do you aim to raise from each of the breeder queens? That presumably means a queen rearing exercise and then replacing queen replacement and so on. So I'm just interested to know sort of just a feel for numbers.
Yeah. In the breeding area, I've probably got 40 or 50 colonies. There's another group which has 20 colonies, say, and there's a few small-scale ones that they don't really do much selection, but they have roughly the right bees just by being in the area. I go through all my apiaries. Some of my apiaries aren't in the breeding area, but I might find a few good colonies to breed from. I don't have any set numbers in mind, but I do like to rear from quite a few, and I'm talking perhaps 6 to 10 breeder queens. You don't have to have that many, but we do. Although I was emphasising how you need similar stock, we are great believers, obviously, in genetic diversity, and that's crucial that you don't forgo that, and that's why we like to choose quite a large number of breeder queens. But all those, say, 60 colonies or more, probably 60 to 80 when you count everybody else's, they're not all related to each other, or not very closely anyway. They might be distantly, so that we're not... we're always aware that if you get numbers too confined, you may have that inbreeding problem. And I don't think we've ever seen inbreeding. And one of the ways we check is to only breed from queens that got a lovely solid brood pattern, because you know that inbreeding shows up very quickly in the brood pattern. So if it's a bit pretty dotty, I mean, it might be chalk brood, it might be something else, but it might be inbreeding. So we choose the ones with good solid patterns. But those queens we rear are able to make with drones from any of those 80 colonies, so we feel that we're keeping a good diversity going. I don't know if I've quite answered your problem.
You haven't actually.
No, I don't think I have.
So I suppose I'm really asking, what proportion of queens would you replace each year out of those 80 colonies?
If the queens are good and the colony is good, it's native and it's good tempered, and they're doing all right, they're average or above average, we wouldn't replace them. We don't replace queens on an annual basis, for example. We let them go. The longer they go on, the better. So I don't know, proportions are difficult, but we just replace when we need to. I don't know what proportion it is really, but we do rear a lot of queens and we sell a lot of queens. So that's one of the problems. We don't keep enough for ourselves. I don't know what proportion it is.
So the improvement comes from the selling of queens to the people in the area?
No, no, that's a loss to our system. If we could keep all the queens we reared, we would make much more rapid progress, basically, because we'd be able to select. Well, because we sell them because we're it's a commercial enterprise. It has to pay its way, otherwise I can't operate. And that's the downside of the whole system, if you like, because I'm losing queens to the system. I'm selling good queens to people instead of keeping them for myself. That's just the way it is, because if it wasn't a commercial enterprise, it wouldn't be rearing any queens, or only a handful. So it's a balancing act.